This evening, we welcome Brian Barber to speak on life in Gaza. Dr. Barber was a social science professor at Brigham Young University when he began visiting the West Bank and Gaza in 1994. It turned into a lifetime project. He spent 30 years tracking three Gazans and their families. He made perhaps 50 trips there. How do you raise a family amid unending conflict between Hamas and Israel? He will tell us tonight. Dr. Barber is a senior scholar at the Middle East Policy Council, senior fellow at the Institute for Palestinian Studies, and professor emeritus at the University of Tennessee. His new book, No Way But Forward, is gripping reading. So, Dr. Barber, once again, welcome. Please tell us, how does life function for common people in Gaza?
Hello, Roy. Thank you for having me. How does life function for the common people in Gaza? Well, that depends on the time period we're talking about. Tonight, if not now, we'll talk about conditions on the ground, how my three families are doing. At this moment, I'm still in touch with them weekly or sometimes daily by WhatsApp. So it's difficult. Extremely difficult, even despite the so-called ceasefire that took place in November.
So, how did they just maybe you could just describe their lives, who they are, and what they're doing. I mean, and how did they get as far as they did? Because they're all in their way professionally successful.
Mhm.
Um, and it's sort of hard to imagine in the circumstances in which they grew up and became adults that they could get as far as they did.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm happy to talk about each of the three of them in specific. First, if you don't mind, I'd like to say just a couple of remarks about the book itself, how it's structured, because I'm guessing that not many have it in front of them. So the bulk of the book, after a 12-page introduction where I give what I believe to be essential history, the bulk of the book are the life stories of these three fathers now. I proceed from one to the other. I came to know them in the course of my empirical work, my scientific work in Palestine, where we studied up to 10,000 families over those 3 decades. And that empirical work has been published in many places, and you can go to my website and get all of those publications. I chose these three to feature in the book itself for a variety of reasons, which I'll explain. But the bulk of the book is their life stories, and my method was to ask each of them to identify for me the most important moments of their lives, the moments where they believe shaped them, the moments that shaped them to be the people they are. And so each chapter is one of those moments. It's it's not a presentation of my views or my observation. It is purely their lives as they see them. Um, and of course, I asked them to read each of their portions to make sure I had captured that adequately. The last part of the book is different. The last 75 pages or so begins on October 7, 2023, with the WhatsApp messages I received from each of these three fathers. And I decided at that moment to postpone the publication of the book in order to capture this dramatic reporting about what it's like to live under constant bombardment and so forth. And so that section, the latter section, is simply their direct messages to me. from day to day or week to week as they experienced their multiple forced evacuations and death of family members and the destruction of their homes and illness and hunger and so forth. So it is, I believe, the most detailed report of what it's like to live under a genocide. So that's the structure of the book. Now, these three guys, could we see Hammam? There we go. This is Hammam al-Faqawi. This is a picture I took of him back in 1996, I believe. His was the first family I lived with. I should say that after I did my empirical work, I decided that I needed to know the culture better before I could interpret our findings, and I therefore started living with families in refugee camps, beginning in 1996, and every year since to 2020 when Corona hit us hard. So weeks per month per year for all of those years. Hammam, I call him the social man. Actually, he calls himself the social man. He thrives on his personal relationships and connections with his family members and his peers and now his students. He was until October 2023 a principal of a boys' school. Despite having received his PhD along the way in educational leadership, he still preferred to stay with his boys, teaching them at school where he felt he had the most impact. His life history, you'll see in the book, is interesting. He was betrayed by the educational system, for example, who transformed a number on his final exams and failed him for his major exam and made him repeat the year, losing all of his friends. His father was in prison when he was up until he was 6 years old. And as a young boy, he couldn't understand, of course, what it meant to be a political prisoner. He married Shada. They've had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. And Shada herself has a degree in English. And they've raised their families originally in the Khan Yunis refugee camp, which is the second largest of the 8 camps, and it's located towards the south. Let's go then to Khalil. This is Khalil Abu Shamala. He comes from the same camp as Hammam, the Khan Yunis camp, although they lived far enough apart where they didn't know each other. Khalil's family was poorer than most. Even in refugee camps, there are strata, and Khalil's family was particularly poor. His father got a nursing degree, but only could ever find a job as the caretaker of a cemetery, and his mother was illiterate. But she taught all of the kids lessons from the soul, as he called them, and taught them the basic principles of Islam, and to care for the poor especially, and to decry injustice wherever one finds it. He was a shy boy. He preferred to avoid interactions with the Israeli military during the first Intifada, but was then caught playing marbles outside the camp and was abused by the soldiers and had a very traumatic experience at age 17, which he said turned him into an activist. He became the head of one of Gaza's leading human rights organizations, married Sahar. They have 3 children. And well, he wanted to pursue graduate study. He was not allowed out of Gaza unless he promised to collaborate with the Israeli military, which of course he refused to do. Right. So let's move to Hussam.
And how high did he rise in his profession?
So he became the leader of the Aldemir Human Rights Organization, the president. And there's a very interesting story at the end of his life where um, Hamas got tired of his complaints about their governance, and they um, they hit him pretty hard psychologically, which he had to recover from. This
And
is
and how do you mean hit him very hard?
Well, they took him down, as it were. They started publishing lots of false information in the papers about him embezzling from the organization, about him sleeping around with women who didn't even live in Gaza any longer, all sorts of things to shut him up. And it was traumatic for him because they were not true, these accusations. But progressively, his colleagues and even some family members started to wonder if they were actually true, and kind of betrayed him in very serious emotional ways. And so this left him very weak, and he left Gaza for 6 months to Jordan to recover at the home of one of his sisters. And he came back and is now doing well, and does various work for human rights.
So he was criticizing Hamas in his reports.
Well, he criticized everyone. He criticized Israel constantly, of course, for the abuses of the occupation. He also criticized Arafat's government. This was back when Arafat was still around, and Arafat jailed him 3 times, but that was more symbolic than anything else because their families knew each other. So it wasn't a real serious deal. But Hamas put up with his criticisms for a long time, but decided eventually that they'd had enough.
And what is he doing now?
Khalil just got a job representing an Italian aid agency. He's the point man in Gaza. This is a very important development for him because since October 2023, he's not been able to work, of course. Before that, he did video work and freelance work for human rights organizations. Excuse me. This was after his return from Jordan. Yeah, so let's go back to Hussam then. This is Hussam Abu Shawish. He's from the Nusayrat camp. It's one of the small camps in the middle of the strip. I
Can you
refer to
explain, by the way, what a camp is like? Just is it tents or is it buildings or what?
Right. In 48, when the camps were established, they were tents, temporary tents, with the thought that the refugees would soon return back to their home. But that wasn't allowed. And so they started building more permanent structures, first in adobe. You still see some of those adobe homes around, but mostly they are locally manufactured cinder block homes with too little rebar, and so very unstable. The land is mostly sand or largely sand, and so all of these buildings are at risk. They're crowded. How do I say this? If I were to take you, let's imagine we're before October 2023. If I were to take you wouldn't be able to really tell which was a camp and which was not, because almost all of them are appended to a city or town, and grew like a tumor over the years, unplanned, so zigzagging alleyways. The one giveaway is the roads are much narrower, and less and unpaved.
So tell us about him.
So Hussam is the scholar. I refer to him as the scholar. He was born a researcher. he was born with a mind that needed to understand, but also needed evidence before he believed anything um, fully. And so by age 13, he had his whole life, of course, heard stories from his parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles about the exodus from their homeland when Israel was created, and the difficulties that family had all the way along. And he believed that in his heart. That was his people, his culture. He trusted his parents, but he needed um, he needed evidence. And so he went for 4 months. Every day after school, he went to any available library in the camp and then in Gaza City to read everything he possibly could about history of the region. He only spoke Arabic then, so this would be Arab materials, but he studied and studied and finally convinced himself through all that study that this indeed was Palestinian land, and that he would therefore honor it and and struggle for its freedom. And he posted that information on classroom on boards at the back of classrooms, making it interesting and colorful, and essentially was teaching his fellow students and even the teachers about Palestinian history, which in those days was completely forbidden in any educational setting. He ended up being a very active member of his youth group during the Intifada. He led the youth group, demonstrating, organizing events, and so forth. And he, for all of that effort, he was first detained without reason and severely tortured. That's one of the hard chapters in the book to read.
And what year was that?
That would be, he was 17, so this would be I'm guessing 1989, 1990 maybe. So right in the middle of the Intifada.
So it was before you actually started meeting the family. That happened
Oh, I'm
before.
sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, this was before I met him. I met him when he was in his early 20s, like the others. So this is recollection
Sure.
on his part. He was able to land a scholarship and got a master's degree at BYU, and then later in life a doctoral degree in Malaysia in educational leadership, and he advanced to position of associate dean of one of Gaza's many colleges, which is now operating again remotely. And so he's back to work. He married Mai, and they have 5 children, 4 girls and 1 son.
These are really educated people, it seems to me. And I just wonder, is that typical?
Well, this is one of the things, one of the profound things I learned that most people on the outside don't understand, and that is how crucially important education is to Palestinians. It is to every diaspora population in some degree because one sees education as the best avenue to secure a financial future through employment and so forth. For Palestinians, it's even stronger. And well, the literacy rate in Palestine, Gaza included, has always been 95% or higher. And everyone goes to school as far as they can go, whether you're a male or a female. Everyone moves on to college to the degree that they have finances to afford that. It's a family issue. Parents and aunts and uncles are invested completely in the education of their children. and it's like a hunger to grow, but it's also a pride in demonstrating that the occupation will not kill them, um, will not destroy them mentally and emotionally, but they will continue to learn and succeed and show their strengths.
And what's he doing now?
He's now running he's doing his deanship at one of Gaza's colleges. It was destroyed, of course, like all others, but they've been able to resurrect it digitally, um, as they have
Wow.
all as they have all through the strip. It's really quite remarkable.
So they have internet and they have electricity enough to carry on like that?
Well, to the degree that they have power and internet connection, they do this, and of course that varies dramatically depending on the circumstances at the moment, what's being bombed and so forth. But yeah, more and more they have regular access to internet and electricity for the batteries of their computers.
How many colleges and universities are there in Gaza?
When I started going, there were three universities only. Um, that has grown, I can't even tell you, I'm sorry, but there must be, I would say at least 2 dozen colleges and universities. There were at least, although virtually all of them have been destroyed. But like Hussam's college, most are trying to put themselves back together.
Are they getting outside support for that? Do colleges abroad or charities make it possible, or do they find their own means to support this educational uh, uh,
Yeah,
situation?
that's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer it. I'm not I'm very aware of how difficult it is to get money through at the individual level. I'm not aware how outside organizations that might be assisting universities and colleges, how able they are to get money into Gaza.
So one of them you just described, I think was Hassan, was arrested and jailed. Were the others also? Did they spend time in an Israeli jail, or were they? I'm sure they were arrested at least once.
Yeah, all of them were detained or imprisoned or both. Uh, Hussam, this gentleman, 3 times imprisoned. Khalil, who we just talked about, also 3 times in prison. And sorry, Hammam was also detained, but not imprisoned.
Well, they've had a lot of scars, but they've reached heights in education that seem amazing, frankly.
Yeah, and your point is good to show that these are very educated, successful people. I want to acknowledge that these are middle class, as we'd say, middle class Gazans. Many are much worse off than they have been. Um, but I know Palestinians so well through the research and through all my time living there that I'm confident that the values and goals and priorities that these three share are fundamentally Palestinian in nature.
So you kept up with them during the latest long conflict. Um, were they moving about trying to duck the bombing or following the orders of the Israelis, or were they able to have any semblance of a home life? in one
Yes.
place.
Um, Across the three of them, all of them were forcibly displaced from their homes between 6 or 10 times. Um, and which literally meant, do you have 10 minutes to leave? Move. And this was very difficult, as you can imagine, just the psychology of being forcibly displaced from your home with the threat that it would be bombed, but also just making the journey um, through the rubble to get to another place that this Israel soldiers said would be safer. And it cost a lot of money, frankly, to hire one of the few trucks that were available. And yeah, they were moved. All of them lived in tents for long periods. Hammam, the longest, over a year in a tent near the sea. And then he finally moved into a vacant classroom in a school that had been partially destroyed. It's easier to weather the elements in the classroom than in the tent. And all of their homes were either fully destroyed or badly damaged. And both Hussam and Khalil are trying to patch up their homes so that they can um, return to them. And as is Hammam, who has the biggest task of that, because his house was utterly destroyed beyond rubble, pulverized. And so he has to go back to the old home in the refugee camp where I lived with him and try to reconstruct that to make it livable again.
Wow.
All of them spent, in terms of moving about, as you say, all of them spent their every waking hour for the first 2 years searching for food and water for their family, walking miles and miles, um, trying to scavenge what they could find. And all of them were severely hungry, and children were ill. But fortunately, with the exception of Khalil, whose son was badly injured in a bombing of a cafe, the children have been unscathed.
They're really lucky, certainly. Um, so you're in touch with them now regularly. I think you told me every week you're in touch with them. Do any of them, or do all of them, have hopes for Gaza recovery, or do they think they have to move out of Gaza, or what do they see about the future?
Well, this is the biggest trauma for them is not knowing what the future is going to bring. They do have hope that things will work out, and that partly comes from their religious beliefs that God will make things right in the end. Um, but they've lived through this awful genocidal period, and much of which, as you well know, has been threats or plans to remove them from Gaza completely. And so, where we stand right now, it's not clear to anyone where these people are going to be living next month or next year. So that uncertainty is quite paralyzing. Um, and as I said, I rank that as the top trauma that they've experienced is this not knowing what's going to happen to them.
Do they have any interaction with Israel, either directly or through organizations? I mean, how do people, because Israel is sort of the superpower there. What is the relationship with Israel?
So there is not, and through my experience over the decades, there is no interaction between Palestinians and Israelis at the citizen level, with the exception of the old city of Jerusalem, where it's divided among all peoples, and in some of the cities within Israel itself, where um, 20% of the Israeli population, as you know, is Palestinian. And so there's interaction there. But other than that, there is no contact. The Israelis are forbidden by their own government from going to the territories. It's illegal for them to go. And obviously Palestinians are not allowed to go virtually anywhere.
By the way, we had several requests here for you to speak up louder, but maybe our tech crew can improve the volume. I hope it's improved in the meantime. Um, okay, so we do have questions from our audience and from our listeners, and I should put them to you. Um, well, one of them is the future of Gaza and the Palestinian Authority. But just in a more philosophical sense, do they, besides prayers, um, do they do people have a vision of how life could improve in the sense that they would have some kind of self-rule? I know they want self-rule, but do they have any vision of how to get there?
No. They don't have a vision of how to get there because of the tight controls that have been put on them all of these years, that they know that they of themselves can't create a future for them when they're under such strict military control as the occupation has been for now nearly 60 years. So surely they have ideas of wanting to be able to govern themselves and to have freedom and all rights that humans deserve, but the track to get there has never been in their power to achieve.
Well, that's true. I find it odd that there's no organizational relationship with the Israeli government, um, because ordinarily you'd think that it would be organized by the people of Gaza themselves and offered to the Israelis, um, and that somebody in Israel would want to respond. I mean, they certainly must have informal relations with Israelis, don't you think?
The everyday citizen?
Well, at least human rights organizations in Israel and maybe the news media. I don't know, and maybe with or maybe even ordinary people, or does that not happen?
I can't speak absolutely for sure that there may be some interaction or has been some interaction over the years among human rights groups, for example. And now, in these decades of easy access to internet, social media, there's plenty of correspondence, I imagine, between Palestinians, youth, and Israeli youth, for example, but minimally. I mean, um, as far as I understand, the Israeli population knows very little about what's happening in Palestine, in the territories, and are not aware of the needs.
So I have a question here from Stephen David, professor at Johns Hopkins. He says, "I'm sorry for the plight of these men and women and their families. I'm curious as to whether any of them have expressed remorse for the horrific October 7th attacks that prompted the Israeli retaliation.
Well,
What have they told you how they look at those at that October 7th attack?"
that's a very difficult question to answer. I'll do my best. In large part, it's depends on when the question is posed to them. Um, Hamas is a national liberation movement, and all Palestinians want liberation utterly, and they are willing to support any force that will promise to give them peace and security and prosperity. There are also people who have been badly wounded, horrifically, and there are times for certain that my people, let's say, um, will um, will be angry at Hamas for all that's happened because it hasn't improved their life. But there are also times when they say, you know, they're the only ones who are willing to fight for our liberation. And so there's some tolerance there. Gazans as a people, Palestinians as a people are peaceful. They want to live life with dignity. And their suffering over all of these decades leads them to want to ensure that in whatever way is possible. So I
Oh,
hope that's a reasonable answer, but it's varied. People change day by day depending on the circumstances.
yeah. I mean, is Hamas really popular?
Hamas has um, never been well. This is a nuanced answer as well. Hamas has is done wonders for the society in terms of aid and so forth, and they were actually very effective leaders at the municipal levels, highly respected. Um, uh, but there are I mean, just remembering as an anecdote, I remember walking down the street with a friend in Gaza somewhere, and this would have been, late 90s, and them pointing out, whispering to me, there's pointing at a guy with a beard and saying, "Oh, that's Hamas," and they were kind of viewed as fringe. Um, uh, and electorally, never a majority has uh, wanted Hamas. So again, yeah, and there, I'll be clear, Hamas is rough. Um, their governance is rough, and people don't like that. But again, there's this tension between you wanted to be treated well, but the need to be able to move forward and get their freedom.
I mean, do they have any choice, or is Hamas in such control that you can't get rid of them?
Well, they are. I mean, they have been the governing force, the police force, the military force. So, um, no, they're um, they're in charge since '07.
And then what do they think about the Palestinian Authority?
Oh, um, I can't remember the last polls, but they all over the years have, ever since, decades now, Palestinian Authority has been viewed with great um, discomfort, to put it mildly, anger. They've not done anything to increase the well-being of the Palestinian population as far as the people are concerned. And yeah, they're not trusted. And yeah,
So one of the so I have some questions that are critical questions about the book itself and your methodology. A few minutes ago, you were mentioning that one of the three, I think it was Hammam, was beaten by the Israeli forces. And the question is, what is your standard for accuracy here? Uh, did you fact check those accounts, or was it witness testimony? Or what did you do to corroborate the claims like that?
I can't think of a way where I could have fact checked a beating that occurred in a prison. So, um,
But that he went to prison, you could fact check that, I suppose. I mean, don't they have discharge papers and things like that?
not a well, not available to an American citizen. The Israeli government's not going to provide that information.
But could you get it from the Palestinians?
Well, I they don't have any documentation that would prove that they were in prison, and
Okay,
I don't have any reason to suspect that their arrests were not valid.
okay. Another question challenges the book because it's self-published and says that readers don't have the usual signals of external editorial review. What kind of independent editing or fact-checking did the manuscript receive, and who made the decisions about verification? Well, obviously, it would be you,
Yeah.
I suppose.
I hired the most particular copy editor you can imagine, who believed that her duty as a copy editor was not just to improve the text, but also to fact check relentlessly. And so she, Pam Ozeroff is her name. I mentioned her in the book. She fact checked everything uh, and helped me find some references that were not quite accurate and helped me adjust some dates that I may have gotten wrong with such things. But she was relentless.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you did that. Because you always come under challenge with a topic a topic like this, I think, and it is important to show that you've done the utmost to check it out. Um, there's there's an anonymous attendee is asking about whether Gaza could really be described as being occupied after 2005, which I guess is when Hamas was elected. Um, And if so, does the book clearly present that this is a dispute? I mean, or what this is, if there's a dispute over whether it is occupied, does the book deal with this?
And the book doesn't deal with it because that's not the nature of the book. The book is a set of stories about human lives. Um, I mean, I can answer that from my own perspective if you like, but it's
Sure.
not it's not the type of material that the book covers.
Do you consider Gaza being occupied?
Oh, I certainly do, and it was actually very clearly elucidated on October 9th, I believe, 2023, when the defense minister said we are going to cut off all water, fuel, energy, uh, and and food to the Gaza Strip. Um, they have that control, and they've exercised that control repeatedly since the settlers left. So the military that used to guard the settlers in Gaza simply deployed to the borders. But Israel since then has controlled every single item that enters Gaza and leaves Gaza, especially since the blockade was put on in 2008. Um, so Israel controls everything about Gaza, who goes in, who goes out, what food gets in, what medicine gets in, water, electricity, and fuel, totally controlled by Israel.
Does that actually mean occupied, or is that just controlled?
Yeah, I mean, I see that as semantic, I guess. Controlled, I'd use the word controlled, but
I usually think of occupied as being occupied by by actual troops and police and
mm,
and run and run by them.
Okay, well, if that's the definition, then uh, I still prefer to use the word controlled. Um, um, but we have to acknowledge that right now Israel is, by that definition, occupying over half of Gaza.
Okay, they're directly occupying, in fact.
Yeah.
I have a question about what do I think all three of your subjects have traveled outside of Gaza, um, which itself is remarkable because it suggests that if there is an occupation or if there is, rigid control, that somehow there are gaps in that, and there's, the ability to to go abroad. Which I find fascinating. I mean, it's also encouraging to know that they have been able to travel abroad. But I have a question here. Another anonymous attendee wants to know how do they feel about other countries and other peoples in the Middle East, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and of course Iran.
Yeah, Palestinians historically have been abandoned by any country, including the Arab countries. So they have no, um, uh, well, that said it's best. They feel abandoned and used, and they're angry about it.
So they don't have very good feelings. Is any one of those higher on their preferred list than the others, or are they all just assumed to be negative on Palestinians, period?
Yeah, I assume, Gaza is small, but there are still almost 2 million people there, and that means lots of different opinions. My guess would be that Egypt, just because Egypt is proximal and does have literal control over one of Gaza's uh, only two pedestrian exits and crossing points. So my guess is Egypt is top on the list.
All right. Um, let's see now, another question. Well, somebody is challenging your use of the term genocide
Hmm.
for the reason that Israel had warned, has warned in general before it undertakes bombing that people have to leave. They may only have 10 minutes, but it does warn them and does direct them. So that in itself doesn't necessarily prove genocide. But what are you thinking of when you say genocide? What is the actual crime?
Yeah, I think to be clear, genocide is a legal term, and therefore it should be decided by legal scholars. When I used it, it's after reading the definitions and seeing, and I use this data, the widespread level of destruction, um, not just the killing of people, but the destruction of all educational institutions, of hospitals, of infrastructure, of cultural archives, everything that is indigenous to that part of Palestine has been systematically destroyed. And that's my evidence.
Do you know when the Israelis bomb colleges and schools and universities, whether there is an allegation that Hamas is using them as for refuge and sanctuary?
That's
I,
that's a that's the typical explanation from the IDF is that's what the cause was.
and any idea of what the truth of that is?
No, I can't verify that.
Okay. Another question, and this is really an interesting one in a way, that the person is asking how many Gazans are there really in Gaza? I think it's 2 million, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but this person says, it seems that the vast majority of Gazans do not have the same opportunities these three men and their families had. Is that true? Or maybe it's not true.
I'm sorry, I don't have the demographics right at hand. But it, like any society, has different classes, and um, the poverty rates in Gaza certainly are much higher than many other places. So, um, yeah, I would agree that a smaller percentage of Gazans are in the middle class than in the lower class.
You say more are in the middle class than in the lower class.
More, no, the other
The
way.
other way
I
around.
mean, there are a lot of
Yeah.
poor people.
Yeah.
Unemployment before October 2023 was already at 50% for men and 60% for young men. And now, of course, it's near 90.
Now, none of these three actually were among those Gazans who worked in Israel. Am I right? They all stayed in Gaza and didn't get. But there were a question from Zev Lavon. He says that there were about 20 to 50,000 Gazans who, prior to October 7th, were permitted to into Israel and worked there. Is that accurate, as far as you know?
Over the decades, even more than that used to go into Israel. I used to watch them go through the little channel they had to go through and come home. Yeah, even up to 100,000 at some point way back when. I'd have to. I think I'd question whether 20 to 50,000 were allowed in any time recently. Um,
Well, it would have been before October 7th, obviously.
but also well before that, since the
Right.
blockade, but I don't have the details.
Okay.
Actually, Khalil did go work in Israel. He had a job at a chocolate factory not far outside
Oh, right.
Gaza.
Right.
And there's a very touching story about his close friendship with one of the Israelis that worked with him on the production line, um, who he later found paroling the streets of his neighborhood.
So, when you again going back to the question about the future, do you think, or what are you hearing from them? Would they rather be anywhere but in Gaza? I mean, do you think that they would like to go abroad if they could? I mean, this is Trump's plan at one point was,
Yeah.
oh, Gazans leave Gaza. Does that fit their ambitions in any way?
That's an understandable question, and again, it's a complicated one. Um, um, Gazans love Gaza. They love it to a degree that most of us outside can't understand. Um, and they virtually every Gazan would choose to live in Gaza um, if the conditions were tolerable. And so you have plenty of Gazans, understandably, who have left since October 23, and many who, again, if you ask them on a very difficult week or day, would say, "Yeah, I need to get out of here. I can't feed my children, etc." Um, but I can guarantee that the essence of being Palestinian in Gaza, as well as the West Bank, is a tie to the land that is enormously strong. Um,
And what is that tie? How do you describe it?
well, it's their home. It's the only place they know is their home. And it's the only thing they have to identify themselves as being who they are is their territory. They're not allowed to, by the outside world, to live independently, to have a world recognized passport, et cetera, et cetera. So their identity is wrapped up in where they live. That's my conjecture on part of why it's so important.
Okay. Catherine O'Donovan asks, how did you gain the trust of the three gentlemen about whom you wrote? And she also wants to know what is the best way for Americans to provide aid to your families and to the Gaza population?
Yeah, the trust came simply by the durability of my presence. I kept coming back. Let me back up and say that Palestinians in general and Gazans in particular um, have always felt obviously very isolated. And when I first went, many were astounded that, wow, an American professor wants to come to Gaza. And I remember after my first visit, and I record some of these in the book, being asked by students and administrators, essentially, do you like Gaza? Um, would you ever come back? Um, please come back. So they appreciated the attention. And then when I obviously showed it was serious by continuing to go living amongst the people and not hanging out in Gaza City with the other internationals, it was easy and smooth in gaining their trust.
It seems like you really did gain their trust. So Reed Harrison asked the question, this will be one of our last ones. What does a typical day look like for one of these three men you profiled?
Would that be like in present time, like
Let's
yesterday?
try that. Let's try the present. Yes, to the extent you know that.
Um, Let me just think for a second. I can tell you for Hammam, who is trying to rebuild the old camp home, he would be searching around for more tarps to use as a temporary roof. Um, he would walk long distances to try to find the best price to the degree that there were multiple outlets. And then he would be working with his youngest son, Omar, building the house. His other two sons are busy with their schooling. They're at critical stages right now. And so they're studying. Um, Khalil is in the transition from living first in a tent for many, many months and then in a rented, unfinished basement of a home. Um, he's sharing his time there and in Gaza City, trying to repair his apartment um, for his family to live in again. And so a lot of effort going back and forth. Of course, for all of them, there's the time spent looking for food, trying to find the best prices for food now that some aid is coming in. Um, Prices have dropped to a degree that people can eat occasionally more normally. But that involves a lot of moving around trying to find affordable stuff. And Hussam is doing the same as Khalil, um, um, trying to repair his home and leading his school and helping his all five of his kids are also at critical stages of education, and so he's helping them move their way through and regularly reports on their advancements and successes.
My last question is how this affected you, this experience of reporting this over 30 years and watching the families go through the ordeals they did.
Mm.
How has it changed you? Has it affected you, etc.?
Yeah, if I could, I'll just back up and complete an answer. Um, I didn't talk about the environmental conditions in Gaza. It is extremely cold in Gaza in the wintertime, much more than I ever expected. And right now, it's freezing. And we just got through the very heavy rain. And so the conditions are just miserable. Children are dying from the cold in the last few days. And so figure that into what a day's life is like, is trying to battle the elements, not just the hunger and other activities.
And about yourself. I mean, how
Yeah.
has this whole experience affected you? You've got more gray hairs.
Yeah, I didn't have any when I started. Mm, I am a better person because of this experience. Um, I've learned a lot about people. I've learned a lot about societies. Um, I've learned to become extremely skeptical and cynical, even about what people have to say, who purport themselves as experts, whether they be pundits or TV anchors or even diplomats who really don't know what they're talking about, and continue to portray a people unfairly. So I'm cautious, but I'm also immensely enriched by having the privilege of observing just how capable human beings are to move forward despite the adversities that they encounter. I want to say here, there's a logic to the title of the book, No Way But Forward. That is a rough translation of an Arabic phrase that a Palestinian would say to you if you question how they're going to get by, how they're going to make it through this latest trauma. And the answer is we have no other choice but move forward.
Yeah, that's kind of inspiring. In fact, it sounds utopian, but it's sort of hope springs eternal even in the worst of situations. So there was earlier I asked the question about how people could send support to
Hmm.
Gaza. Do you have an answer to that? I mean, I think UNRWA takes contributions, if I'm not mistaken.
UNRWA does take contributions. UNRWA USA would be a great place to start. As we've heard recently, Israel is now banning many of the aid groups. I would have referred you to MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, but they're now forbidden. If you'd like to help as many people as possible, I would recommend sending money to the Gaza Soup Kitchen. They have a GoFundMe site. I personally know the family who run it, and I trust them, and they're doing very hard work at providing meals to as many people as possible. Um, it's really not possible, really, beyond GoFundMe campaigns, to help individuals. Um, the banking system is still working, such that when I transfer funds to my three families, I'm able to do that bank to bank. But you would need to know individuals who had bank accounts and who you could wire money to. Essentially, it's a wire transfer. It's difficult. That's one of the hardest parts, is knowing how to get money in. But I would take a look at the major aid organizations that are still permitted. Let me add another, which I would highly recommend, based here in DC, called United Palestinian Appeal, UPA, United Palestinian Appeal. I know their director very well and trust him implicitly. And they provide services of all kinds, not just food aid, but medicine and so forth to Palestinians wherever, but especially Gaza now.
Brian, thank you so much for that information, and also just for telling us about how this has affected you and telling us about the the three families. I think you've given us some insights that would be very, very hard to get anywhere else. This is a unique book. I find it compelling reading and really enlightening and eye-opening.